Hi everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with another PB&J card class. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how you can use your stamps to create do-it-yourself Christmas watercolor cards. And all of the cards that we will be making today are 5x7 cards, but you could most certainly, if you like a more standard size card like an A2 4¼ by 5½ inch, just make the card slightly smaller and they will still look beautiful. So I am using Arteza watercolor paints in the tubes, and I'm just putting them onto some just really affordable palettes that I got, I think, from Target. And I wanted to have a limited color palette for all of these cards. So I'm going with a little bit softer tones, some sort of gray blues, turquoise greens, and a bright red just for a touch of fun. And then I'm going to work kind of assembly line style. So off camera, I went ahead and stamped all of my stamps to create these cards. I used Penny Black's newest cling stamps. There was Pinecone Poetry. I'm also using Bulb Basket, Scarlet, Feathered. Aren't those birds so cute? I love those chubby little birds. More birds, the 40-856 Hollyberry bird. Two more here, Cottage Whimsy 40-863 and 40-855 Amaryllis Bundle. And I stamped those using Toffee Crunch Memento ink onto Canson 140-pound watercolor paper. I used a MISTI stamp positioning tool to do all of my stamping because that watercolor paper has a little bit of texture to it, so that helps me to get a really good impression. I can stamp them a couple of times. Then I went ahead and painted all of my backgrounds. Now I have sped up this video, even so it's still a long one, so grab a cup of coffee, grab a snack, and just kind of settle in for a long video. But what I've done here is I started then just by painting all of the backgrounds. I'm using the colors from the palette that I created. I really like these soft tones for backgrounds, and I'm just painting around the image, but here I can paint over like the pine needles because a darker color will be going on top of that. So I don't need to be perfect about this, and it's watercolor. It's not meant to look perfect, and so there's no need to stress about this. Just enjoy the process. But I do like getting those backgrounds done before I paint the entire image. That way, if I really goof up a background, I can just restamp it and start again. So here's a look at all of those backgrounds after I had painted them. I won't make you watch me do all of those. For some I use sort of tans and soft yellows, and then others I use sort of the gray blue or a light blue. Again, there's that really nice tan sort of vintage look. Here's got a little bit more of a yellow undertone to the tan color. And all of the colors I've used and all of the supplies I'm using are listed down in the YouTube description box below. And I'm listing all and linking all of the Penny Black products down in that description box below. So after I had stamped them, painted all the backgrounds, then I added some background stamping. And for the most part, I wanted this stamping to add kind of a vintage look and to be tone on tone. So for this first card, I'm using the Penny Black stamp Posted with Love. And all of these background stamps are some of my favorites that I really like for this sort of tone on tone look, where you can have this in the background but then do your focal point painting on the top. And this for me is a great way to add interest and depth to one layer cards. And when the technique is primarily painting, I think this just kind of takes it to the next level. So I stamped that with antique linen distress ink, and then I pressed the ink pad right onto my stamp positioning tool lid, and I'm just picking up some of that with water and splattering that on the background just while I had that lid out. I just wanted to tie in that color that I stamped with. Now another background stamp that I love, especially for Christmas cards, is 40-781 Music Background. Here I'm going to stamp this just over on the left side. I am not trying to ink it perfectly all over. I'm using a sky blue Ranger Archival ink to stamp that down. It's just like the lightest blue ink that I have. And that's it. Stamped that background. Another great background stamp if you're looking for sort of that sort of vintage or tone on tone look, almost like you painted on an old piece of paper, is our Life's Journal set. And I'm going to stamp this a couple of times here on this Pinecone card. And you'll notice I did not ink up the entire stamp, just tried to kind of focus on the areas where I wanted it to stamp. It doesn't need to be perfect, and using the stamp positioning tool is handy because if you don't ink up as much as you wanted, you can always go back and re-ink and re-stamp. Another great one for backgrounds is 40-780 letter background. I'm going to use this here on the poinsettia card in the upper left and the bottom right corner. So with the stamping of the poinsettias, I wanted to create sort of a diagonal design across the card, and I'm sort of accentuating that by putting this text stamping, this script, up in that upper right or upper left and bottom right corners, kind of guiding the eye down and through the card in a diagonal way. Another great background stamp that I use all the time, maybe you're sick of me using this one, is 30-238 footnotes. And this time I'm just going to use the tiniest little bit of this right up here, overlapping some of the flower and some of the background. And then 40-637 winter branches is nice if you want some background stamping that is not a text type stamp. And I'm going to add that here in that light sky blue onto this blue background. I think this just gives this a nice finished look. Then if you don't want to do any stamping on your background but want to give your one layer card just a little something extra, you can do some masking. So here I'm masking with just some painter's tape. I sort of rubbed it on my sweater before I put it down on the card. And then I'm using an ink blending tool and a foam pad and some Toffee Crunch ink. And I'm sort of starting off of the edge and working my way on in a circular motion. I only did this around the top. Sometimes on cards I'll do this around all the edges. But you can see how just giving that sort of framed up a rectangular part up at the top really adds some interest to the one layer card. So once I had stamped all my focal point images, painted the backgrounds, added some tone-on-tone background stamping, now I am ready to paint in the images. So I am painting using those watercolors on my palette. For this card, the Amaryllis bundle, I am starting with a lighter color, blending it out with water, and then putting a little bit darker color in any area where the petals are sort of going back behind or under another petal. I love stamping with the Toffee Crunch Memento ink because I think in the end it gives it a pretty close to a no-line watercolor look. You can still see some of that outline, but overall I think your eye focuses mainly on the images that have been painted as opposed to like a stark black outline of the entire image. But it's very forgiving in that you can still see the lines a little bit while you're painting and afterward, so it doesn't all end up looking like one big blob. So if you're new to watercolor and you want to get that no-line watercolor look, you might want to try it with this Toffee Crunch ink because it's pretty forgiving for that. You can see I finished the flowers and then I colored in the stamens using a black Pitt artist pen and an extra small tip. Just an easier way to darken up those centers and get that detail. You could also do it with your paints, but I have a little bit more control with the pen for that area. And again, I'm not showing every part of painting everything, otherwise we literally would have been here forever. But just little bits here so you get an idea how you could paint this on your own. I do love these softer colors just for a change, sort of that really light green and a touch of that gray blue for shading. It still gives that Christmas vibe, but it's just a little bit different than super bold and vibrant reds and greens. And this is a really fun way if you want to create lots of watercolor Christmas cards. You have a lot to send, but you don't want to make the same card over and over and over. You can still work assembly line style, but mix up your focal point images, some of your background stamping, so that you don't get bored with it, but you can still create a lot of cards efficiently. I also love to have a lot of these cards pre-stamped and ready to be painted because sometimes I just want to paint. That's very relaxing for me. I love to paint like when I'm watching TV. And so if I have them pre-stamped and ready to go, then I can just grab them and paint a little bit and get them done in a relaxed way. I stamped my sentiment from Joy and Warmth. I did stamp that earlier, but I just wanted to point that out here, what sentiment set that came from. And then this card is complete. This is a 5x7 card, but of course this would definitely fit down on a smaller standard A2 size card too. You would just have a little bit less white space surrounding the images and the backgrounds. So now we'll turn to these adorable little birds. I did color in their eyes using that Pitt Artist pen just to darken up that black. I think that really brings them to life and makes it look finished. That's a watercolor pen too, so I can paint right up next to it or over it even, and it won't blend or bleed out into the image. And I'm just going to get sort of the tops and then the tail feathers here. Now, if you're looking for different ways or color combinations for painting in your stamps, I know sometimes birds can feel like, oh, I don't know what to paint or where each color should sort of change into a different color. Be sure to check out your packaging for your stamps. You can also do a Google image search and get some ideas there, or don't be afraid to just go with what you like. There's no wrong way. If it's a happy Christmas card, it's a happy Christmas card. I don't think anyone's going to pick apart if the feathers or the birds were painted perfectly. It's not meant to be a nature study or a photograph. So don't be afraid to grab some birds or a flower you're not used to painting and just have some fun with that. Again, I wanted to keep things kind of light and soft for this just to really accentuate that it's a watercolor look, that it's hand painted. So I'm going with that on the birds, not going with a super bright red for them, but pulling in some of those soft golden yellow tones. And then here I will begin working on the holly leaves. You'll see I kind of jump around the image. That allows me to do some blending and some shading without the two sort of leaves, if they're touching, blending into one another. Once it's dry, then you can go back and work on other leaves that are next to or adjacent to the originals. And then I also went back here with some white watercolor paint just to sort of tone these down a little bit. I felt like they got a little limier than what I was going for. So you can adjust. I just put a little bit of my white paint on top. Then now that that limey color was out, I'm going back and just darkening up a few areas just for visual interest so that things didn't look quite as flat. So I'd love to know, do you like when you're watching these videos, do you prefer videos where you just see one card from start to finish, or do you like videos like this where it kind of shares the entire creative process for a set of cards? I'd really love to know what you prefer. If you want to leave a comment down in the YouTube description box, I would love that. Also, let me know of this set of cards, what is your favorite? I would also love to know that as well. Now, once this was complete and dried, I very carefully and lightly added just a little ink blending over here on the side. I felt like that tied into some of that color on the birds and just grounded it a little bit and added to that vintage touch or vintage look. I'm also going to take some white acrylic paint and squeeze it here onto just an old acrylic block. And then I will grab my paintbrush and add some snow. So you could also just splatter your paper, so water that down and splatter it, but I have bad luck with splattering and it makes me nervous to do it right at the end after I've spent all this time and I'm almost finished with the card. So I actually find just picking this up with my paintbrush and just dotting it here and there all around is much easier and does not really take that long to do it. And it's kind of fun, just a fun little finishing touch to add to the image, tie everything together and give it that snowy magical look. This card features a sentiment from our 30-925 Jolly Snippet set. I've said this many times, but I love this set. You can always find just the right words as well as the size that will fit your card. I love Rejoice and Be Glad to, these birds look like they are rejoicing and singing together. So now we'll move on to this Pinecone poetry image. Boy, I really changed the colors that I was going with on this, and I thought about cutting that out of the video or redoing it and just showing you how it ended up finishing, but I thought, no, I'm going to leave this in so that everybody knows that these things sort of evolve. I usually don't sit down and just know exactly what I'm going to do and paint it up and it turns out the way I wanted. Oftentimes I think, oh, I'm going to just paint this with this light blue color and then add a touch of green, and I did not like that light blue color at all. And so I went over it with green, added different layers. Then I put this green on and I thought, oh my gosh, that looks like limeade. I don't know, I did not like that. It was too bright for the rest of what I was working on, so then I mixed in some other colors and tried to lighten it up, and just a lot of back and forth on those leaves to get where I wanted them to be. And so I just wanted to leave some of that in there for you and show you that, one, watercolors are very forgiving. You can always keep layering more colors on and they give kind of a transparent look. So if your first color you put on is too blue, put some other greens with it. Put something on top and just kind of start to actually mix your colors right there on your project. Also know you can always splatter some snow or add a die cut snowflake if something doesn't get painted just the way that you wanted or you have a blotchy area. You can also do like I'm doing here. I have a wet paintbrush and I'm putting that color down and then I'm just sort of getting it wet, then drying off the paintbrush and then sort of lifting up some of the color. And that helped me on that back leaf to kind of lighten up the tip of that leaf to match the others. I hope that made sense. So wet it down if it's not already wet, then rinse off your paintbrush and dry it off so it's like a thirsty brush and you can kind of lift up some color sometimes. Then I thought, I think I need more green around these around the pine needles. So here I'm adding that to the background. And actually for me, I think that's what it needed the most, was just to have that green sort of carry out into the background a little bit. For this pine cone, I was very grateful I stamped this in that Memento Toffee Crunch, so it isn't really a true no-line watercolor. You can still see the lines on there, but they're not a dark black because this and no-line watercolor, I don't know if I would have the patience for it, but it was very forgiving because it was stamped in the Memento Toffee Crunch ink. So I'm just working section by section, and just making sure some of those sections in the area where they go sort of down into towards like the center of the pine cone, just making those darker. I also think you can just treat this pine cone as a whole. So when you stamp this, if you wanted to just stamp it in a darker color so that you can really see all the outlines of each of the areas of the pine cone, you could do that too, and then just paint it shade it as a whole. So like the left side of the pine cone darker, moving to lighter on the right side of the pine cone. I hope that makes sense, but there's lots of different options. And if you look here up close, this is not perfect. Just leave some areas of white, some areas of dark, and it really will start to come together on its own. The illustration will take care of that for you. I'm adding a touch of yellow here just to sort of warm that up and make it look a little bit different than that background color. Just blending that out. But don't be afraid to leave some white on the pine cone as well. And then I am going to paint in the berries. That is one color here that I really enjoyed having a nice bright color, was the red. So the other colors are pretty subdued, but I like the bright red. And then for this card, I just wanted to accentuate sort of this area up here where the sort of a diagonal design as well, like we did on the other. So I'm inking up the background on this top right hand side and then sort of letting the eye move down through the pine cone and the sentiment, and then inking this bottom leftish side of the card. And I think that accentuates that visual line where to look from top right to bottom left and through that sentiment. And speaking of that sentiment, that comes from 30-917, our sentiment set called Joy and Warmth. And I also added the snowflakes to this card, and here is a look at the finished card. Next, we will work with these 3 cute little birdie friends. So I'm just going to paint these very basic. Now I've made another card with these where I used very bold, very vibrant colors. If you check out the Penny Black blog, you can look at card ideas for all of the stamps that I'm using here. And there's more than one card idea. So if you check out our blog post, it will give you more ideas, different color variations, different color intensity for these. Just if you get the stamp and you want to make some different variations with the same stamp, you can see that too. And I've linked to our blog and all of the other ways you can connect with Penny Black down in the YouTube description box below. So you can get lots of card ideas on Penny Black's Facebook page, the Instagram, website, blog, Twitter. So follow us on all those places and we'll keep giving you lots of ideas and card inspiration for sure. So I'm so sorry here, I went a little bit off camera. Sometimes when I get to painting, I just forget where the sort of the field of vision is there. So I've kind of gotten the top part of the birds done, and then I will move in here down at the bottom. Again, keeping this very light and soft. I think sometimes at the holidays that feels kind of good too. Just a little bit of a peaceful look. So you can see nothing technical with how to paint in these birds. Just add a little bit more of that yellow. And I did color their eyes with that black Pitt artist pen. Here I'll color in the greenery. I'm also adding a touch of that sort of golden color up on top of this inked area. I wanted to tie that all in together. So I'm just going to paint that in here. And I really like how that turned out. And then I painted in the berries just with that red very simply. And then I stamped my sentiment. The sentiment, or that was stamped on there already, but it comes from 30-924, Shine God's Glory. And that is up there at the top of this card. There you can see those berries are painted in. Just this very light, simple, soft card. All right, here is this basket of bulbs. I love this image because it is so different than typical Christmas images, but it still has that totally great Christmas traditional vibe to it, even though it has a little bit different design to it, not your just average Christmas tree. Something very special about it. So I started off in painting this basket, and I first thought I'd go really light, but then I decided to darken things up. And so I'm just adding that color along here, leaving some white space. I really want this to have that loose watercolor look, nothing too perfect. Sort of just accentuating some of the lines that are already there. I'll move in and paint the greenery. Again, I was very grateful I stamped this in the Memento Toffee Crunch ink because the detail of the greenery shows, but it also kind of takes on the green color that's going on top, so it still gives it that pretty much no line watercolor look without any stress. So I'll get that greenery done and then move in and paint the bulbs. I'm using that really bold, bright, happy red. And I really like how that looks with the greenery. I think on this image, because it is kind of a non-traditional image, it was nice to use very traditional green and red together. And then I decided here to just add a little bit more of a golden look to the basket so it didn't blend in quite as much with the ground down below that I had already painted for the background. And then to the sentiment on this card is from that 30-925 Jolly Snippets. And it just nestled right in there next to the basket. I just thought it was such a happy sentiment with Be Jolly, a basket of jolly. And here is the finished card. So now we will move on to these very beautiful poinsettias. And I'm going to start by painting the leaves in. I decided to keep them fairly light. Again, I just wanted these watercolor cards to just be a little bit softer than what I typically do. I love bold and vibrant color, but I also just felt like these images were so elegant and could really have like a vintage softer look to them. I'll paint in the pine needles here with a little bit more vibrant green so things aren't too flat. And then I'm going to keep the poinsettias white. So I do want to put some shadows in here so they don't look like I just forgot to paint them. So I'm just going to add a little bit of this neutral color here. It's kind of a grayish taupe color. And I will just add that to any places where the petals are sort of underneath another petal. And then I can use some water to blend that out. Also accentuated some of those lines on the petals, especially those ones that are up near the top, so they didn't look too plain. And then I will sort of paint over these lines for the sort of pine needles branches with a darker color. You could also use a marker or a pen like I'm doing here with the green. This is another one of those Pitt Artist pens that is very fine tip, and sometimes I just have more control with a pen for these tiny little areas than I do with the watercolor brush. And then here I'm going to do some of the berries in sort of a darker wine kind of burgundy color, and then some I will do in the brighter red. So I'm just going to go around, and that way if there's any places where there are two berries next to each other, there is some variation and they don't sort of blob all together. But any place where there weren't two next to each other, I left those for the bright red because I wanted that to be the primary color. I'll get the center of the flowers, and then for my sentiment on this one I used our die set 51-745 Mary Edger, and I just used that word Mary on its own. I didn't use the edger portion of the die. I turned it on its side to kind of keep with that diagonal design going from top left to bottom right, and the card was complete. All right, I hope you're still hanging in there with me. We have another card to paint. I love how whimsical this little cottage is, the sizing, sort of the juxtaposition of the sizing of these pine branches and all of the different berries and just the beauty of that surrounding the little cottage. I feel like those branches stamped in the background just accentuate that and fill in that open area and give it a finished look. So I'm just painting in these, adding a lighter green and then dropping in a little bit more vibrant green on there and letting those two colors mix and blend together. Kind of blending them out here with my paintbrush and some water. Next up we'll work on these. I wanted these to be a little bit different green. That way there's just some visual interest between the difference in all the different greens here on the background. And they kind of alternate every other one, so it's a lighter green, more vibrant green, lighter, more vibrant. I think that just keeps the eye moving around the design. Just grabbing a little bit more color here on my paintbrush. And then I will move into painting the pine cones. So you can see I'm not getting too picky with those. I just put in sort of almost like stripes of darker color and then went back and blended that, but leaving some white, not making it perfect at all. And I just think as much as possible, if you can leave a little white on those, it helps. And then here I'm dropping in just a little bit of color on one side to give it some dimension to those and some shadow area, and also to warm them up a little bit. So that was more of a golden brown color that I added on there. I will get these stars painted in. I love that there are 3. It just balances out things perfectly. That's part of the illustration. And I wanted to add another shade of green here just to keep things interesting. So I'm just going over this with a different green. I will use that Pitt Artist pen with the extra fine tip. I believe these are the journaling pens, just to trace over these branches. And then I decided to go red on this house. So I just wanted something really bold for the little cabin. And there was going to be a little bit of red on the berries, but I just wanted it to be down here as well. So I'm just going to paint that in. I painted in the berries. We'll add a little shadowing up here on the top. I felt like that also kind of tied into those pinecone colors. Get the door. Obviously does not need to be perfect. A whimsical image like this works great with loose watercolor. And then the sentiment for this one comes from 30-917, Joy and Warmth. And you can see that painting there, the background stamping, and in a minute I'll show you the card with the sentiment. Man, I hope you hung around for this whole long video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black, like I said, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, our website, our blog, and everything is linked for you down in the YouTube description box below. Happy stamping!